All right, hello everyone. We're going to be arguing about utilitarianism versus deontology. Um, those who know anything about my channel will have a good guess of which side I'm on, namely the utilitarian side. Um, so, do you want to present some, like, just an initial case for deontology, some cases where you think consequentialism gets things wrong?
Sure, absolutely. So I don't think that consequentialism is that much of a crazy view, but I think it gets things wrong in quite a lot of cases. So one of my main issues is that it seems to be the case that not everyone is equal with regards to what they deserve. So it seems really strange to me to think that, for example, if you have been raped by someone, you should care about that person's happiness just as much as about, I don't know, the happiness of, I don't know, Jesus Christ if he had existed, or any other good person who deserves to be happy. Um,
I think we have clear instrumental reasons to care less about the happiness of horrendous people.
sure.
Um, but I don't think that the account. So I don't think that. Well, so what? I mean, you could be a consequentialist who thinks that the importance of an increase in someone's life is proportional um,
hmm
to their virtue. But also, I don't think that there's any way of having a sort of cogent account of ethics that mets out moral worth in proportion to virtue. So, like for example, do you think that? So let's say that at one moment a person is, let's say that for 10 minutes a day a person became horrific and sadistic. So they just take this medicine, like does good things through most of the day, but then just for 10 minutes they just want to like kill as many people as possible, and they like lock themselves in rooms so that they can't kill any people. Nothing bad happens during those 10 minutes. Would they deserve to suffer?
Um, Probably they wouldn't, but I think it's quite a strange case because that would kind of undermine their personhood. And as a deontologist, I think that um, that personhood is essential to what someone deserves. So I
Okay,
I
so
don't really have a very strong intuition what exactly that person would deserve.
okay,
I
so
don't think they deserve to suffer, but
so so
it's yeah.
so so does a person's desert, does it vary over time, over the course of their life, such that the amount of happiness that a person gets from such that a person's happiness produces different amounts of value, depending on whether or not at a particular moment when they achieve that happiness, depending on what how virtuous they are at that particular moment, or is it a weighted average of the virtue of their life?
Yeah, I think it definitely depends. And I think it also depends in what kind of relation you are towards a certain person. I don't think it's like um, only that this person deserves that kind of happiness because they are generally virtuous. But for example, if I have some kind of friendship or some kind of family relation with that person, it just seems intuitively true that we should care more about our friends. And I want
Well,
to,
I mean, I agree that it does, but I think there are plausible
yes,
debunking accounts of that.
I want to go back to the instrumental stuff because you mentioned that we could care about it for instrumental reasons. I think that will be one of our major disagreements because you will try to explain the intuition via instrumental reasons, but I just don't think that really works. Like basically, like Hume said, we don't have the intuition that it is just bad in some sense, but it's just bad because it's wrong. It's wrong to care about a random person just as much as about your
Okay,
best friend who've spent your whole life with. That's the intuition.
well, but I think that it's so. I think that the reason why we have that is it is on instrumental grounds, and it's very easy to mix up instrumental and intrinsic goods when we compare things. So if every time we interact with a particular thing, it ends up being good, it's not surprising that we would end up having the intuition that that thing is good, even if we can imagine counterfactual scenarios in which that thing is not good by virtue of its goodness being instrumental rather than intrinsic. And it seems like if you hold that there's an independently of any of any instrumental considerations, that we have intrinsically greater, more reason to care about our friends than to care about other people
I'm not sorry.
For non-instrumental reasons. Well, then you get the possibility of Pareto of options that are of losing out on Pareto optimal action. So if you could either give 10 units of well-being to your best friend or 15 to my best friend, and I could do the same, and if we both privilege our best friends, then everyone would be made worse off. And I think that the correct moral system would not result in everyone being made worse off.
Yeah, so in such case, could you repeat the case, please?
Yeah, so if I could give your best friend 10 units of, or your best friend 15 units of well-being, or my best friend 10 units of well-being, and you can give your best friend 10 units of well-being, or my best friend 15 units of well-being, everyone would be better off if I give 15 units of well-being to your best friend and vice versa. And yet you would hold that we have a greater obligation to give it to one's own best friend. So
Yeah, I think in such cases, I think I just would be willing to bite the bullet here. I think if we truly think about this case, I don't think this is that unintuitive, really. At
but
least it's not nearly as unintuitive as the stuff that's entailed by
well, we
classical
can make we can make it very unintuitive. So we can assume that a person's quality of life starts out at an extremely negative level, such that their subjective experience is equivalent to being burned alive, and then we can posit that this cycle is repeated, such that if we both take the parade, that if we both help out the other person's best friend, then everyone will be living this just awesome life, and if we only help out our own best friend, then both people will be in experiences that are half as unpleasant as being burned alive. And in that case, it seems very clear that we should help out the other person. That a world where two people experience being burned alive or half of being burned alive is less good than a world in which both people have flourishing immense well-being. And given that this decision is iterated, it's not the case that each individual decision makes up this giant utility calculus. So you can't appeal to it on the basis of it's worth putting aside deontic considerations for a great enough utility consideration, given that each individual decision only increases utility a very small amount if we help out the other person's friend.
Yeah,
And this is sort of the problem that Humer highlighted in his paper, A Paradox for Weak Deontology. And I think it's a really good objection.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad objection. Yeah. Let me think about it.
Yeah, we can move on to a different case. So, I
Sure.
mean, you were mentioning retributivism. So, do you think that some people deserve to suffer?
Yes, so I'm a very, very, very weak retributivist. So I think there's something to be said about. I think some people deserve some kind of punishment independently of the consequences, but mainly I'm just a negative retributivist. So I just think that you can only punish people insofar as they have been morally blameworthy. So
Okay,
I think it would be completely outrageous. The thing which utilitarianism implies, like the sheriff case, for example, that just seems to
Yeah,
be
we,
something
yeah,
I don't
we,
think
we
we're
can
with.
we can talk about the sheriff case in a moment. But on the point about retributive things, so just to be clear, you hold that some people deserve to suffer, correct?
Yes.
So then, okay, so then if you were choosing, so let's say that you had uh, uh, a quadrillion of these people, and you could either inflict suffering on a quadrillion people who deserve to suffer, or you could avert a genocide that would kill a million people. Which one should you do?
I would avert the genocide, of course.
Well, okay, but to the extent that there's a large enough number, assuming that each of them is a little bit good, if it's a sufficiently great
Way
number,
or way.
assuming we're
This kind of
aggregationists about that.
calculation, I'm obviously not doing that. I'm a
But
deontologist,
sure, but
not a
surely there. Okay, wait. So you think that despite retributivism being good, there's no number of retributive actions that we should trade
which
off
would
for like one
justify a
person's death?
genocide, not
Well, okay,
preventing
let
genocide, of
okay.
course.
Let's say it was one person's death versus a billion people undergoing who deserve to suffer undergoing suffering.
Uh, I mean, I've never thought about it, but my first intuition is that there couldn't be such a number. No?
Wait,
And
what do you
I
mean there?
don't see why a deontologist would be committed to that.
Well, no. I'm just asking you what your view is.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So
Sorry.
yeah.
No.
So
So
would
my
you?
intuition is that there's no such number. No.
Okay.
Uh,
So
like,
okay.
I
Okay. So or sorry, good.
I just wanted to reaffirm that I'm a very, very, very weak retributivist. So if someone who has done something wrong goes free and they cause no further damage to society, I'm not someone who is like, wow, that's horrible. I, I generally don't want bad stuff to happen to people. But I think there's something to be said about some kind of justice in that sense.
Okay, so let's consider a case in which so do you are you familiar with Norcross's argument for why some number of headaches aversion is more important than saving a human life?
I don't think I am. No.
Okay, so let's say that so presumably if you could either prevent save one human life or prevent 10 instances of let's say paralysis, which really damages human life, where someone's just fully paralyzed. Presumably, preventing the 10 cases of paralysis, that would be better. Or it doesn't have to be 10; it can be 20 or 30, but just some number. And if you could prevent 10 cases of like mostly paralysis, or sorry, for every if versus 30 cases of paralysis, you could instead prevent 80 cases of mostly paralysis. Presumably, you should prevent the 80 cases of mostly paralysis. And then something slightly less bad than that. Enough of those you should prevent over that. And enough of that, something less bad than that. And so we can keep going down this process where we make the experience slightly less bad until we get all the way to headaches. And so then we get to the conclusion that a sufficiently large number of headaches averted, assuming you accept transitivity. Do you accept transitivity?
I don't.
You don't accept transitivity. Okay, what do you think about the money pump argument? I can explain the money pump
I don't
argument
think
if
I'm
you're not familiar.
familiar with
Okay,
it.
so the money pump argument is suppose that you prefer A to B, B to C, and C to A. So if you prefer A to B, you'd be willing to trade B and a little bit for A. If you prefer C to A, you'd be willing to trade A and a little bit for C. You prefer B to C, you'd be willing to trade C and a bit for B, and then you just keep going in the circle where your set of preferences results in paying a little bit and moving in circles, which if consistently applied, you can take all your money or bring about an infinitely undesirable state of affairs that's perfectly consistent with your preferences.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems bad. It seems like the correct set of preferences should not consistently result in an infinitely undesirable state of affairs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I gotta say that I think you're much more familiar with the literature on transitivity, so I'm quite sure that if we go down that road, I won't be argue against you that well. But I think that the view that I would take here is some kind of a Moorian shift here. So if the acceptance of transitivity leads us down to conclusions which are completely outrageous, such as we maybe could argue about that later on, such as the repugnant conclusion or the thing you mentioned previously.
Oh,
I'm
I want
just
to talk about the repugnant conclusion. I'm
I'm
excited
just
for that.
gonna say, well, maybe I haven't read enough about it. Maybe I can't explain to you why it failed. But if I can trust anything at all, then I can't accept that conclusion. And so the premise needs to be wrong.
Well, I mean,
I think if
but to the extent that we have just the most robust possible arguments for accepting transitivity, which involve one, the fact that transitivity just is incredibly intuitive and obvious. I mean, to me, someone who rejects transitivity, it feels like they don't understand the meaning of modal terms, of the term better than. But even putting that aside, we can show that if you have transitive intransitive preferences, that you can be money pumped, where on your consistent application of your preferences can result in an infinitely undesirable state of affairs. I mean, to me, that would strike me. And there's another argument that I can present for accepting transitivity. Like, to me, sometimes the correct answer is going to be unintuitive, but to me that strikes me as being as sort of like rejecting the laws of supply and demand, because you don't like what it says about the minimum wage and you find that to be unintuitive. Like, no, I mean, it's just that there are more fundamental principles that are much more obvious that can be sort of proved rigorously than the other principles. And so, and the
I think we have lots of intuitions which are just as fundamental, which are opposed to views that transitivity would entail. So we need to reject some fundamental intuitions. And I think there are quite a lot of philosophers who actually reject transitivity, which would be quite unexpected if it were the case that it's that obvious.
I mean, there are not that many. There's only one that I know of. I think Scanlon rejected transitivity, but I mean, like, transitivity is pretty
I'm not
widely
sure that's
accepted.
true.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know that many. But I mean, just another argument for accepting transitivity is, so let's say that you prefer A to B, B to C, and C to A, and then you're comparing A and B to B and C. Which of those should you prefer? Well, you would actually prefer both of them to the other one, because you prefer A to B, and so A is better than B, and B is better than C. So you prefer A, B, right? But so if you arrange it that way, A is better than B, B is better than C, therefore AB is better than BC. But if you arrange it the other way, C is better than A and B equals B. So depending on how you arrange it, you get contradictory results. So if you accept dominance, that if this is an informal statement of it, but dominance says that if you have x1, x2, y1, and y2, if x1 is better than y1, x2 is better than y2, then x1 plus y1 is better than x1 plus x2 is better than y1 plus y2, assuming there are no significant relationships between any of them. If you accept that, and you accept that if A is better than B, B is not better than A, then as Huber showed, it follows from that you should accept transitivity. Transitivity is just, like, I think, very obvious. But,
yeah, so we can continue with this, and you can give me quite a lot of examples to which I might not have a good reply.
Okay,
but my answer will basically be the same.
Yeah, we can talk about the repugnant conclusion, because I've been reading about the repugnant conclusion recently, and I get very excited about the repugnant conclusion.
We can, but it might not be that fruitful, because if I reject transitivity, then I don't think it's that hard to answer.
Oh no. Even if you even if you reject transitivity, then there are still reasons to accept the repugnant conclusion. So one of them is there was I forget the name of it. This was described by uh, Budolfson in a paper. Budolfson and someone else whose name I'm blanking on. But so if you have a scenario in which you prefer um, in which any plausible view of population and axiology will hold that if you could either add to a population 10 billion people with high positive utility or some vast number of people with lives barely worth living, that you should add the vast number of people with lives barely worth living, depending on other features of the population. So, for example, let's suppose that we're average utilitarians. Um, uh, uh, um, sorry, I got distracted for a moment. Yeah. So like say we're average utilitarians. Well, if we on average utilitarianism, it's just fairly trivial to show that depending on the current average quality of life of the population, that it can be better. It can increase average utility to create a vast number of people with lives barely worth living than to create 10 billion people with great lives. So, like, I mean, do you have a view in terms of population axiology that allows you to escape the repugnant conclusion?
Um, uh, uh, I think what I would say is that maybe I wouldn't know the exact point where um, um, weighing more people and less average happiness, etc., where this wouldn't work out. But I think if I hold the view that something else than happiness is important, like, I don't know, I think there was uh, Feldman who said that what was it, like a society which would result from the repugnant conclusion would lead um, to people who who don't get what they deserve, because they don't have a certain standard of happiness, or because they don't um, get the right sorry, I can't think of the English word, the right desert for the good thing they've done. And in that way we could say, if we don't reduce the worth of a human life to the happiness, that such a society could still be bad, even if I can't tell you the exact point where this occurs.
Okay, so um, uh, okay, so as Arrhenius proved that if you accept the following five principles, then you have to accept the repugnant conclusion. So let's see which one you reject. So do you accept the dominance principle, which says that if population A contains the same number of people population B, and every person in A has higher welfare than any person in B, then A is better than B?
Seems intuitively reasonable.
Okay, do you accept the addition principle? If it is bad to add a number of people, all with welfare lower than the original people, then it is at least as bad to add a greater number of people, all with even lower welfare than the original people.
Seems reasonable as well.
Do you accept the non-anti-egalitarian principle, which says that a population with perfect equality is better than a population with the same number of people, inequality, and lower average, and thus lower total welfare? I can repeat that. I don't know why I said that at 200 words per minute.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So a population with perfect equality is better than a population with the same number of people, inequality, and lower average, and thus lower total welfare.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Okay. D is the minimal non-extreme priority principle. There is a number n such that an addition of n people with very high welfare and a single person with slightly negative welfare is at least as good as an addition of the same number of people but with very low positive welfare.
Sorry, please repeat that.
Yeah, there is a number n such that an addition of n people with very high welfare and a single person with slightly negative welfare is at least as good as an addition of the same number of people but with very low positive welfare.
Yes, sounds reasonable as well.
Okay, and E is the rejection of the sadistic conclusion. When adding people without affecting the original people's welfare, it can be better to add people with negative welfare rather than positive welfare.
Yeah, so I grant that all of these.
Yeah, and they in conjunction require you accept the repugnant conclusion.
Yes, I know, but I think it. For example, I could have just rejected one of those principles.
But they're all obvious.
They are, yeah, exactly. But just as obvious, it seems to most people that, I don't know, the dust speck thing is completely absurd. I don't think how you can prioritize one of those intuitions over the other. I'm just going to admit, okay, they sound reasonable to me, but just as reasonable, maybe even more reasonable, it seems to me that utilitarianism leads to very absurd conclusions. And I'm quite familiar with your content, so you often make the move to say, okay, we have reasons to distrust the deontological intuitions, and we have reasons to trust the utilitarian intuitions, and some of those are more fundamental than others. I don't think that's true, really. I think the belief that people have rights, or the belief that friendship is inherently valuable, I think that's just as obvious as every single principle that you've mentioned here.
Well, we can talk about those in a moment, but right now we're just talking about the repugnant conclusion. And you can be a deontologist and also accept the repugnant conclusion. In fact, Humer is a famous example of a deontologist, an intuitionist who accepts the repugnant conclusion. But I mean, so the thing is, to reject the repugnant conclusion, it requires throwing out lots of independent, very plausible principles. So I would rather accept the independent, very plausible principles. I mean, okay, let's just take another example. So let's say that rather than being about 10 billion people with awesome lives versus vast number of people with lives that are barely worth living, let's say it was just one person with an awesome life versus 10 billion versus lots of people with lives that are barely worth living. Would you really prioritize creating the one awesome life over the many, many people?
I wouldn't. But
okay, so why does
for example, one obvious reason for this is that I, as a objectivist theorist, believe that things like friendship, like community, are inherently valuable. Obviously, one person that's not a good state of affairs.
But presumably, it's not the only thing that's valuable. But okay, let's say you had 8 people, enough to be you had the cast of friends, so they're all good friends with each other. Okay, and you could either create the cast of friends or some vast number of people with lives that are sort of barely worth living. Which one would you create?
I don't think it works with 8 people because, I mean, I just mentioned friendship, but other things that are valuable are our modern democracy, or our scientific enterprise, our
But those are some things that are worthwhile, but those are not the only
yes.
things that are worthwhile. And presumably, those things are not infinitely more worthwhile than high positive welfare. So presumably, there would be a state of affairs with much higher positive welfare than our current one that is an overall better state of affairs than one in which we have democracy, right? I mean, if you had a choice between us having democracy or all of our lives being 10 billion times better, presumably making them 10 billion times better would be better, right?
Yeah, so I agree that it's not.
Okay, so then if you
In,
make the well-being sufficiently great, then then the well-being is enough to outweigh uh all the other people. But I mean, we can just take a slightly modified example. So let's say that you have our current society as it is, and you can either create a vast number of people's lives barely worth living, or create one extra person with a great life. Which one would be better to create?
let me think about it. Ah, ah, hmm. I honestly don't really have an intuition of the way, to be completely honest here.
Um, okay, but so then we can go back to the original case. So, if the welfare is high enough, then presumably the high enough welfare would be better than the welfare of presumably the welfare that's high enough would be high enough to be better than the welfare that's like decently high, but where the person gets to participate in democracy and read books with their friends, right? So, and if that's better than the other one, then if you could either create one person with very high positive welfare or create a vast number of people's lives barely worth living, then it seems like it would follow from your view, unless you think that there's some intrinsic feature of of other people which affect the value, which non-causally affect the value of producing an extra person. Unless you think that, then it seems like you have to accept that you should bring about one person with an awesome life rather than lots of people with lives barely worth living. And yet that seems absurd. That seems way more unintuitive than the repugnant conclusion.
Does it really?
Yes. And I mean, I've also given I've given you a series of principles. So what you have to do is you have to reject at least one of the incredibly obvious principles that was given by Arrhenius.
Mhm.
You have to reject transitivity, um, find some way of escaping both the money pump objection, the objection given by humor, and also the just something that overpowers the like very potent intuitive argument for accepting the repugnant for accepting transitivity. And then you also have to answer the argument from reject the intuition from Budolfson and Spears, which shows that on every current view of population axiology, it can be better and certain, depending on the current population, to create an extra 10 billion or a vast number of people's lives barely worth living rather than 10 billion people with great lives. Um, uh, and I mean, that just seems like a much greater theoretical cost than just
What?
accepting the repugnant conclusion, especially because we know that humans are not especially good at aggregating small quantities and at reasoning about very large numbers. And so I think that in cases like that, you have
Uh,
so
uh,
many
I,
principles on the other side, you should shut up and multiply, to quote Yudikowsky.
I think the objection that we aren't that good about reasoning about high numbers, I don't think it works, because the intuition isn't that um, um, we calculate, and then the calculation doesn't outweigh the the our intuition isn't that the math doesn't work out, but the intuition is that doing that kind of math is itself wrong. Our intuition is that there's something wrong, inherently wrong, about a society where everyone has a life that's barely worth living. And because you mentioned that I have to bite so many bullets here, I think that is true. I think
Glad we're in
utilitarians
agreement.
have done. Sorry.
I said glad we're in agreement. Then you have
I
to bite
think
less.
utilitarians have done a pretty good job at defending the repugnant conclusion. But I think if we, for example, also look at the reverse repugnant conclusion, I don't see how it's obvious at all that I have to bite a bigger bullet than the utilitarian.
Yeah,
Quite
when
the
you say the
opposite.
reverse repugnant conclusion, are you referring to the very repugnant conclusion, or are you referring to something else?
Um,
Tell me what you mean by the reverse repugnant conclusion.
yeah, I'm just gonna read it. Wait, sorry. For any world where 10 billion peoples have lives of excruciating agony, there's a worse world where a vast number of peoples have lives almost worth living. This reverse repugnant conclusion is at least as repugnant as Parfit's original.
Oh well, yeah, I don't think that that's unintuitive at all. So, I mean, I think that to the extent that that's unintuitive, it's because our intuitions suck. So, would you accept that for any
Sure.
amount of, so let's say that your suffering is at negative 100,000. Presumably, there can be some number of people suffering at negative 90,000 that would be an overall worse state of affairs.
Probably. Yeah.
And surely there would be a number suffering at 80,000 that would be a worse state of affairs.
Yeah, now we're
You
gonna
see where
just
I'm?
go
Yeah,
back
and
to
then
the
70,000,
blunt
60,000,
situation,
dot, dot,
which I'm
dot.
just gonna reject.
Wait, what? It's not aggregate. No, I mean, in this case, you have to reject. What you have to reject is transitivity. You have to reject either
Yes.
the principle that for any amount of suffering, there's some worse state of affairs that has people who are suffering less, or you have to reject transitivity. Okay, so let's imagine that that we start out. Um, I mean, just showing the money pump conclusion is just very trivial here. So let's say that we start off with one person experiencing negative 100,000 units of suffering. Or no. Sorry. Let's imagine that we start off with a vast number of people experiencing, a life that where they have negative one utility. Presumably, you would pay a little bit to move to a world where you have a smaller number, a much smaller number, but with negative two utility, right?
Sure.
And you would pay a bit to go from that to a smaller number with negative three utility, right? Okay, and so we can keep going to this until we get to some very small number with negative 1 million utility. And then, so you've just paid a large amount to keep moving along this chain to get to a better and better state of affairs, but you have transitive preferences. So then you want to start over because you regard the starting point as now better than where you are. So then you would pay a bit to go back to the starting point, and then you would just loop infinitely, resulting in an infinitely undesirable state of affairs. And unless you're in favor of infinitely undesirable states of affairs, then you have to accept transitivity. And we would expect our intuitions to not be very reliable in this case. I mean, we know that humans are not very good at aggregating risks. So, for example, Humer mentioned in his paper that people, when you tell people about their risks per car ride of getting into an accident, that has a much less great deterrent effect than if you tell them about their lifetime risks. We know that humans just can't conceptualize large numbers. So, to our minds, there's no difference between a million and a billion. It's really hard to have a salient picture in one's mind of, a billion people enduring small amounts of suffering. But I mean, if you just add up which experience, if you lived everyone's life, which one would you rather live in? You would obviously rather live in the state of affairs where the one person suffers a lot, because the other state of affairs has way more overall suffering.
Yeah, but like I said, I don't think the intuition is mathematical in nature, and it's not just the case with the repugnant conclusion. It seems to be the case that any kind of view which treats morality in that way that you can just do the math, like you said, in like hundreds, thousands of cases we can imagine, it's against our intuition. And
Well, yeah, because our intuitions suck in many
yeah,
cases. This
sure,
is
you can
exactly
always say that.
given the poor record of our intuitions throughout history, we would expect the correct moral view to get the wrong to not converge with our intuitions some of the time.
Sure.
But we wouldn't expect is the incorrect moral view to every time it diverges from our intuitions for there to be very plausible independent principles backing it up, such that the person who accepts the principle rejecting the incorrect view such that they have to bite a bunch of bullets too. We wouldn't expect people who hold the incorrect view to be hundreds of years ahead of their time. We wouldn't expect there to be lots of independent, plausible ways of deriving it from first principles. We wouldn't expect
then again,
like evolutionary debunking, etc.
You mentioned plausible first principles. The exact same thing could be said by the deontologist, for example.
What plausible first principles do you think can justify deontology? That like provide a account of deontology as a whole. Like do you think how do you prove from first principles that the full deontological view? Because I have about 5 ways of doing
what
that for
exactly do you mean
utilitarianism.
by first principles? I was using it in a way.
Yeah, so I was describing plausible seeming axioms that, if all true,
Yes.
entail the moral view. So that's true of utilitarianism, for example, if we accept Harsanyi's principles, if we accept some line, not to toot my own horn, if we accept Sidgwick's, etc. And all of these are independently plausible. And you have nothing like that for deontology. The deontologist can't even agree on what a right is, much less provide a simple way of getting rights, all of them from first principles.
I think the vast majority of deontologists would agree, for example, that persons have rights, that persons are sorry?
No, sorry, go ahead.
Did you say something?
No,
would agree that persons have inherent worth because they are persons. I think there are many obvious cases. Almost all deontologists believe in the doing allowing distinction. I think there are many obvious principles. I think if you ask people on the street which they find more intuitive, the case that people have rights, or that friendship is valuable, or that transitivity is true, I really don't think that there's a huge difference. I think 99% of people would affirm both.
But people on the streets, you don't ask them, like, they presumably don't understand the full moral picture. But all the things that you're saying, all the things that you're saying wasn't disputing the point I was making. The point I was making is that you can derive utilitarianism from a variety of diverse, independent, plausible axioms. There's no way to do that for deontology. The fact that there's groupthink among the deontologists and they happen to agree on a bunch of what these rights are does nothing to show that you can derive deontology from plausible first principles. I agree that people have intuitions about rights. People's intuitions about rights tend to be relatively shared. I think there are some devastating objections to this whole notion of rights, but so
yeah, I don't really see why a non-moral axiom would be worth more than a moral axiom.
Who says it's a non-moral axiom? Who says it's a non-moral axiom? I guess transitivity is, sure. But, transitivity as applied to the moral case is moral axiom.
I think your argument was that you can derive utilitarianism from things like transitivity. Whereas I have to resort to things like person have rights, but I don't I don't see why I should trust a non-moral axiom like transitivity.
How would we go about determining which rights people have?
I would try to. I mean, I'm a coherentist, so I think that reflective equilibrium is the best way to gain moral knowledge. So I would just weigh my intuitions with each other, think hard enough about it, compare cases, and then I think about which rights are plausible. It seems completely obvious to me that people have rights. They have a prima facie right to life, but when exactly that right will be violable, I just have to think about it, just like we do in every other case in philosophy.
Okay. Right, but I mean, the point is, you can't, with utilitarianism, you can derive it all from plausible axioms and first principles, while you can't for deontology. But the point that I was making is that, given, if we look back at the track record of our moral intuitions, they've very often been wrong. So the fact that our intuitions often diverge from utilitarianism is just as expected on the hypothesis that utilitarianism is correct as on the hypothesis that utilitarianism is incorrect. You know, if you have a machine that gets the moral truths right 90% of the time, then it's no surprise that there would be lots of cases in which it doesn't get the correct in which it doesn't get the correct moral view. But what I was pointing to is that utilitarianism has a variety of features that we would expect of the correct moral view. It seems like deontology has none of those features. In terms of the historical track record, theoretical virtues being derivable from first principles, the fact that what seem to be just knocked down obvious arguments against utilitarianism, like the repugnant conclusion, end up being like really complicated, and it shows, and like you have to bite. I mean, it would just be unexpected a priori for every time you have an intuition where you think a moral view gets it wrong. Every time there just are lots of plausible arguments for why the moral view gets it correct, and so that would be a priori surprising. And so I just think that what you presented is no evidence against utilitarianism because it's what we would expect on the hypothesis that utilitarianism is correct.
Okay, so regarding historical progress, I think we should talk about that. I think what the deontologists should say here is that yes, I think we can say that utilitarians were largely correct, and I think that's a decent argument. But the deontologist should just say it's obvious that they were right for at least partly they were right for the wrong reasons.
Well, for example, think about slavery. That's a priori improbable, right? Like the prior probability and the incorrect moral view being right over and over again for the wrong reasons is unlikely.
I don't think that's improbable at all. For example, let's assume that deontology is true. Let's assume that people have persons have intrinsic rights, or let's say that every being which has desires has somewhat of a right, so including animals. Then it wouldn't be unexpected at all that utilitarians also gets it right, because it's a feature of persons, of people with desire, that they also can feel pleasure and pain. It would just be like an epiphenomenon. Not the pleasure and the pain is the reason why utilitarianism got it right, sorry. But the fact that everyone who has desires in the actual world also experiences pleasure and pain, and I think that's exactly what our intuition tells us. 100 years later, we don't think slavery was wrong because we didn't think about the pleasures and the pains of black people. No, we recognize that black people are people like us. They are persons who deserve respect.
What, in virtue of the fact that they are persons, they deserve to have their interests considered. But okay, so Um, so let's talk about rights. So I have a series of objections to rights. So um, so I have so many objections. I'm not sure which one to give. Okay, so do you accept that a perfectly moral third party observer should hope for you to act morally?
Um, I don't. I don't.
Okay, so
I
you
don't
think that
because I
God
think
in
that there
heaven
are.
should often be like have his fingers crossed, hoping that you act wrongly? Um,
Yes. I'm just gonna
okay, well
bite that.
that seems like a pretty big bullet to bite. But okay, so
I don't.
so
For example, if we think about a paradigmatic case of a deontolo- deontological obligation like promise keeping, I think it seems perfectly reasonable to think that if I promised my uncle to, I don't know, donate 100 euros to, I don't know, charity A, but it turned out that charity B is more efficient, then I have a perfectly good reason to donate to charity A. But the other person should think, well, he should donate to charity B.
so
I, I,
should so
I don't think that's a counterexample to deontology. I think it's just you're just restating utilitarianism there.
okay so if you should hope that other people act wrongly, should you hope that you act wrongly?
I shouldn't because I believe in personal reasons. For example, I think that if I promised someone to donate to charity A, that gives me and only me a reason to do that. And I should always do what is right. I, as a deontologist, believe that the right is prior to the good. I don't think we should always do what maximizes good, but what is right, what I have most reasons to do. And I have most reasons to donate to charity A.
Okay, so consider a case with a very large series of rings of mortal people. The innermost circle has one person, the second innermost has five, third innermost has 25, etc. Each person corresponds ow, to five people in the outer circle. There are a total of two options. Option one is kill one person. Option two is give the five people in the circle outside of you corresponding to you the same options you were given. However, the persons in the 100th circle will only be given the first option if the buck doesn't stop before reaching them. So you're in the first circle. Which option should you take?
I'm sorry, could you repeat it?
Yes. Okay. There are a series of um, there are a series of rings of moral people. So everyone here is perfectly saintly. Okay. Um,
Sorry,
but
what does a ring of people mean?
like like a, like
Like a
circles of
literal
people.
ring?
Yeah, so the innermost circle, it's not much of a circle, but
Okay,
it's just one guy here. Then outside of them there are five people. Then outside of that there are 25 people, where each person
okay,
corresponds to five people in the circle outside of them.
okay.
Okay. And so the question is, and everyone in the circle is perfectly moral. But if you get to the 100th circle, then the 100th circle will only have the option of choosing option one. Okay. So the options are that people are given are um, so you can either take um, uh, you can either take you're in the first circle. You can either take option one, which would kill one person, or you can take option two, which would be to give the five corresponding people who correspond to you the same options that were given to you. Which option should you take?
Wait, so am I aware when I make that decision? Am I aware of all the
Yes.
consequences?
Yes. Yeah, you are.
Um, uh, uh, if I understood it correctly, then I think the intuition would be to kill one person.
Okay, so okay, you think that. Okay, right. So I would agree with you, of course. So now the question is: so suppose that you could either kill one person, or you could kill one person to prevent the five people in the circle in the ring outside of you from only having the first option. So it's a question of whether you should kill one to prevent the five other people from killing one. Which one should you do in that case?
Uh, yeah, I think in that case you should kill in order to prevent them from killing five people.
Oh, you support killing one to prevent five other people from killing one? Wait, really? Okay. Should you kill to prevent two other people from killing one?
I mean, probably not. And uh,
Okay. So
uh,
well, so then we can just set up the
working back
original.
to the
Yeah, we can
yeah
just set up the original scenario with two people. Okay, with two people in each ring. So ring one is one person, ring two is two, 4, 8, 16. Da, da, da. So
yeah.
then, in that case, which option should you take?
So I gotta say that I've not very strong intuitions either way. Um,
Well, just bear in mind that if you don't kill the first person, then a total of 2 to the power of 99 people will be murdered. And
yeah,
that's a lot of
if I
people.
know those consequences, then I should kill the two.
Okay, but so you think that if you have two perfectly moral people, you should not kill one to prevent them from each killing one, but you should prevent them from each having the option to either kill one or to pass the buck. Correct.
Um, having in mind the potential consequences of what that would entail if they had the option, if I understand it correctly. Uh, uh,
Okay, well, so then
I
that
gotta say it's
that requires rejecting the very plausible principle um, that giving a perfectly moral being extra options shouldn't be a bad thing. So if you can either do A to prevent Jesus from having only option one, Jesus is just a stand in for a perfectly moral guy, or you can do A to prevent Jesus from having either option one or two. Giving a perfect being extra options can't be a bad thing. But
mm,
your view commits you to the notion that giving a perfectly moral being extra options can be a bad thing.
um,
And that seems like quite a bullet.
for example, it could be if that being isn't aware of all the consequences.
No, 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 the being is aware of all the consequences.
Um, sorry, then why should that being act in such a way that this would lead to the
Okay, so
bad
so you
consequences?
so you've agreed that if you were perfect that you should not kill one person to prevent two other people from killing one person. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. But you have agreed that you should kill one person to prevent two perfectly moral people from having the option of either killing one person or giving the two people in the rings outside of them the option of killing one person, correct? Assuming the large series of saying of rings of moral people.
Yeah, so I have a really hard time following the case, to be completely honest with
Okay,
you.
so you have a series. So you have a series of rings of moral people. Okay, so you can kill one person. So you have two options. Option one is you kill one person. Option two is you give the two people in the ring outside of you who corresponds to you the same options that were given to you. So they'll each have the option, having the two people who correspond to them, the option of either killing one person or of giving the two people outside of them the option, and those people, and so the remaining will stand out. And so you've agreed that if they only had option one, that you should that you should not kill one person to give them only option one, but you should kill one person to give them options to prevent them from having options one and two. And so that commits you to the notion that giving a perfectly moral person extra options can bring about an overall less desirable state of affairs. Such that if you give a perfect being more, if you can either kill one person to prevent two perfect beings from having one option, or kill one person to prevent two perfect beings from having both options, you shouldn't do it in the case of one option, but you should do it in the case of two options. Because giving a perfect being who will always choose the correct option, giving them extra options, can be a bad thing, and can be a thing such that it makes it more important to kill a person to deprive them of that extra option. That just seems like a ridiculous view.
Huh. Yeah. Uh, I gotta say it's really hard for me to respond to those kind of thought experiments, because I'm confronted with them for the very first time. But I agree. If my view would entail this, then this would sound like some kind of a problem. I agree with that.
Yeah. So your view, I think, does entail that. I'll link an article in the chat just for those who are interested um, uh, about this. So, um, okay. So now, okay. So now, so do you think that the person should push the guy in the bridge case?
I don't think so. No.
Okay. Absurd. No, I'll give the reason why I think it's wrong, rather than just emote. So okay. So let's say that you have a similar case. Um. Uh. So the deontological bridge principle, which says that you shouldn't push the person off the bridge to stop the trolley from killing five people. Presumably, that scenario, that principle is morally no different from the deontological switch principle, which says that you shouldn't push a person off a bridge to call them to fall on a button, which would lift the five people to safety, but they would not be able to stop the trolley. So let's say that you push the guy off the bridge, it hits a button, it parachutes the five people up, but then the trolley runs them over. Presumably, you shouldn't push the person in that case, correct?
You shouldn't, but I'm not entirely sure whether those are exactly equivalent. I think one
I mean,
could argue.
it seems roughly. I mean, the only difference between the two of them is that in one of them, the people are lifted up to safety, which them being lifted up to safety does not matter, right? Given that they're not at any risk because the guy has already stopped the train. So just the only difference is in one of the scenarios they move upwards in ways that affect no one. Presumably, people being moved upwards does not affect the overall desirability of the situation, right?
Sounds reasonable.
Okay, cool. So now say that someone is in the switch scenario. So they're deciding whether or not to make the decision, and then a genie appears to them. As happens, and every time you're deciding such things. And the genie gives them the following choice. So he'll push the person off the bridge onto the button, but then he'll freeze the passage of time in the external world. So the decision maker can have 10 minutes to think about it. At the end of the 10 minutes, they could either lift the one person who was originally on the bridge back up, or they can let the 5 people be lifted up. So do you think it would be reasonable to accept the genie's offer? The genie's offer is basically just to you push the guy, but just to sort of delay the decision. You can undo it at any time over the course of those 10 minutes. Presumably, like, it wouldn't be wrong to take the genie's offer, right?
Probably not.
Okay. So now, so if at the end of 10, yeah, so it seems reasonable to take the genie's offer. But then at the end of the 10 minutes, the genie comes back to them, and then they have two options. They can either lift up the one person who they pushed before to prevent that person from being run over, or they can lift up the 5 people. It seems obvious that they should lift up the 5 people. This is analogous to the switch case, which is analogous to bridge. Right?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting example.
Okay. So, right. So then if they're given the genie's offer, then they can they can either undo their original action. But remember, undoing their original action involves basically lifting that one guy up to put 5 people back into jeopardy. And so presumably they shouldn't do that. And so they should, one, take the genie's offer, and then two, if they've taken the genie's offer, then they shouldn't do the whole switch and remove thing, right? So so if we accept that, then you would have to reject the very plausible principle that if you take action X and then undo action X such that nothing changes in the external world, where you do action X, freeze time, and then undo action X so that nothing happens, that can't be a bad thing. So you either have to accept that they should airlift the person back to put the 5 people down, which seems absurd, or you have to reject this very plausible principle that if you take an action when time is frozen and then undo it before any time passes in the external world, that pair of actions can't be immoral.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure about that principle. I think what's important in that case is what happens in someone's head while they reason about this, and if they recognize what this would entail if they don't reverse the action, I think then it wouldn't be that implausible to reverse it, if I understand it correctly.
Well, okay, but if you so when they're deciding to reverse it, think about just the mechanical action that's being performed. So now that they're in the decision of deciding whether or not to reverse it, currently there's one guy on the track, and they can flip the person on the track back up and then put the 5 people back to be run over. So it's basically the opposite of the trolley. It's basically the opposite of the original switch case. It's where they're in a situation where they can airlift the one guy to safety to put 5 people back in jeopardy, which it seems like obviously you shouldn't do. I mean, I guess you can reject that, but that seems like just another massive bullet. And, I mean, they say that we utilitarians have to bite all these bullets, but it seems like, you deontologists have to bite a whole lot of bullets.
I do agree that we have to bite some bullets.
I think you have to bite a lot of. I think that bullet that you have to bite bullet for at least one meal a day. If there are so many bullets to bite.
I mean, the thing is that I think the perfect deontologist could defend this much better than I could do, especially if they had known about the case beforehand. I could have also prepared 100 cases which are so complicated that you almost can't follow them. And then, I don't think that's the perfect way to evaluate a theory.
Well, I think that the perfect utilitarian could have attacked deontology a lot better than I could have. So, neither of us are perfect defenders of our view.
Sure, but like the kind of reasoning that I generally do. I mean, I like to talk about cases, but um, um, firstly, I like to talk about cases mainly which both people are familiar with. Like, I wouldn't have prepared a special case that you have never heard of before, and which is very, very far from reality, and which you need to repeat 3 times in order to understand it. I would have talked about about a sheriff example, or about
We can
maybe
talk
the
about the sheriff
department.
example. I went. I have lots of things to say on the sheriff example. Uh,
Sure. Let me just finish
but yeah,
that and
sorry.
continue. Um, like the way I generally um, like to evaluate moral theories is like to think about it more generally in how far they explain a very vast range of our judgments and of our intuitions. And I don't think, for example, the last case, I don't think it really shows that deontology doesn't correspond to many of our basic intuitions. I think it has shown that I'm not ad hoc able to defend myself in this very particular case, but I don't think it's that harmful to deontology in general. And now, if you want to, we can talk about the sheriff.
Yeah. Okay. So one first point, I think. Okay, let's explain the sheriff case. So a mob of people plans to kill 5 innocent people. It's 5 every time in every thought experiment. So they're planning on killing 5 innocent people, unless you, as the town sheriff, say this guy committed the murder, and then they'll kill that guy, but not kill the other 5 people. And so the question is, like, should you frame the innocent person so that the mob kills them rather than killing the 5 other people? Okay, so one first point that can be made is that in most realistic situations, one shouldn't frame people. So we have strong reason to say no to the question in general of whether innocent people ought to be framed, even if we can imagine sparse situations in which it would maximize happiness to do so. So no, I mean that's certainly would not be sufficient, but it's a bit of an undercutting defeater. It's a heuristic that you shouldn't frame innocent people.
Yeah, like I said,
but I agree that that consideration is far from decisive. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think like again, if we refer to instrumental principles, I think we just get the intuition wrong. It's just like if we have the intuition that 2 + 2 = 4, and we talk about our intuition that 3 + 3 = 6. It's just a different topic to me. The intuition is that justice is inherently valuable. The intuition is that you should only punish people insofar as they are blameworthy. And the intuition is that there's at least something bad about this case. The deontologist, I'm not an absolutist. I'm not a hardcore Kantian, so I don't think there's no number where this can be outweighed. But it seems very obvious to me that there's something wrong about this, independently of the consequences.
So I mean, another point is, and these are just sort of preliminary notes before I get to the arguments that I find really persuasive. Is that, like, if you just sort of imagine if your family members were the people who were being, some of whom were being framed. Like, I mean, if you really think about it from the perspective of the victims, where you sort of care about all the victims equally, like, it starts to seem way more intuitive that it would be better to frame the 1 innocent people, to prevent 5 people you care about equally from being murdered by the mob.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes the case not ideal is that 500 people is quite a huge number.
No,
I
no.
think one.
Let's. We made it 5.
Oh, sorry. Um, yeah, in the case of 5 people, I, I think even if that were my family, I think I should have the intuition that this is so outrageous that I mean, obviously for prudential reasons, etc. Obviously, I hope that nothing bad happens to my family, but I wouldn't have the moral intuition that this is what should be done.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would just disagree, but um, and it's sort of like if you care equally about all the members of your family, and let's say that the other person who was making the decision was also a family member. Like if you care equally about everyone, and you're taking into account everyone's interests, and you're making thoughtful decisions, it's not clear that you're sort of leaving anything out in the moral picture. Like I don't think morality exists over and above just being what we would do if we cared about the right things and cared about everyone equally. Well, at least everyone equally intrinsically. Obviously, instrumentally, we should care more about some people than other people.
Yeah, I mean, I just would disagree that it's only
Yeah. So okay.
instrumental.
Well, yeah. So we can get to the some of the objections. So, um, uh, so let's imagine a case in which a person, we can call him Tim. I don't know why I gave him a name. Sorry, I'm just reading off a thing I wrote a while ago. Uh, so they can either so they wrote an anonymous letter that would be delivered, which would frame an innocent person who would be killed by the mob. However, after writing and mailing the letter, Tim had a change of heart and decided to prevent the letter from being delivered. When he uncovered the stash where his letter was stored, it turned out to be in an iron box with a robust security system, such that if 2 letters were taken out and destroyed, it would sound the alarm, and the letters would be returned to their original location. As Tim is about to take out his letter, he sees another letter, which has the names of 5 people on it, who Tim knows are being framed and will be killed by the mob. If Tim takes his letter out, he will not have framed an innocent an innocent person, and no one will be worse off as a result of Tim's actions. However, if Tim takes out the letter containing the 5 names, he will prevent a mob from killing 5 innocent people. In this case, it seems very intuitive that he should take out the letter with 5 names, yet this is very much like the earlier case. When one is taking out the letters, it shouldn't matter who wrote the letter. Additionally, suppose one wrote the letter when they were asleep. Um, in that case, it seems even more bizarre to take the letter because it was written by them rather than by the 5 that would save more lives. And so, in this case, where he can take out his own letter, if he does take out his letter, then um, nothing bad will happen. But if he doesn't take out his letter, then he'll be in a situation where, as a result of his actions, one innocent person is framed to prevent 5 other people from being killed by the mob. In that case, it seems very obvious that he should take out the 5 other names rather than take out the innocent person who he read the letter to. Sorry that these cases are getting weird again, but just to respond to the sheriff example, they should sometimes get kind of out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's problematic because it hinges on very small details, and I don't want to ask you to repeat it 3 times, but if you don't repeat it, then I'm not entirely sure whether I can give.
Here, I can copy and paste the
Yeah, sure, that would be great.
text. Okay. Right, I put it in the private chat. Wait, no, sorry, I haven't yet. Okay, wait, sorry.
Yeah.
It'll come in a bunch of parts. Because StreamYard is bad at delivering messages. Wait, sorry. How? Sorry. Um,
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, it's finally been sent. A friend of mine sent me a message on Discord, and he said, "Sheriff example is your positive trigger phase," which I thought was a funny comment.
Okay, 1 second.
Oh, and for those who are curious, I'll put the link to the original blog post where I talked about this in the regular chat. So.
Yeah, so the first thing, it says, wait, where is it? When one is taking out the letters, it should not matter who wrote the letter. Is that obvious?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's obvious. Like, I mean, if there are 6 letters in the mailbox that are going to be sent to the mob, that will, or six names that will cause, each name will cause the mob to lynch an innocent person. You can either
And
prevent
all of those are
one.
from
Yeah, one of the letters was from you back when you were being a just complete jerk, like just trying to get innocent
wait,
people
but
framed. Um, but and so the question is whether, like, it seems so obvious that you should take out the 5 letters that will get the 5 people framed rather than the 1 letter. The fact that you wrote the letter shouldn't matter in terms of whether or not, like, you're now in a situation where you can either prevent one innocent person from being killed or 5. You should obviously prevent the 5.
um, I
I guess
think
you could
given the
deny that intuition. But...
yeah, I'm not going to deny it completely. I think given the consequences in that case, which would be very traumatic because 5 people would be dead, I think it could be outweighed. But I don't think the principle in and of itself that it doesn't matter who wrote the letter is obvious. I don't think
Okay, so let's say it was 2
deontologists
people.
should accept that generally.
Well, or no. I mean, we can make it 5 people because in the sheriff case, where it's 5 people, you think that it's obvious that you shouldn't frame the innocent person. So, what's the morally relevant difference between the 2 cases?
Wait a second. Yeah, so it's quite difficult to think of one. Obviously. Wait. Yeah, so I can't think of one at the moment, I gotta admit.
Okay, but I mean, so this is sort of the point that, like, in all these cases, you've trotted out cases where you think utilitarianism gets the wrong result, and in all these cases, we've seen that really you have to bite like large bullets. What are the odds that the wrong moral view would make it so that every time you diverge from the wrong view that does better in terms of theoretical virtues, does better in terms of the
Given,
historical track
sorry,
record, that every single time the view, when you try to reject it, you'd sort of have to bite all these bullets. I mean, it's sort of, well, yeah,
that
there's a
I
biblical
think
story that I won't go into, but
I mean I see the force kind of, but I just gonna go back to this. Given that you had all those cases in advance, and I just have to come up with responses within like 1 minute. If I think about it, like for 2 minutes, I look completely stupid in front of everyone. So I think I'm in a very difficult position, and I think you can see this if you when you talk with David Hume. Even though he's a genius, when you confronted him with those cases, he often had to say, "I don't know, maybe," because it's just very hard to. And I thought, okay, surely, oh, maybe that could be a feature of the cases. Maybe your cases are just so ingenious that even the best deontologist on earth, not even Kant himself, could have come up with a possible reply. But I'm not sure whether that's true. Um, and I think there are some cases, I think there are quite a lot of cases, in fact, where it seemed like deontology couldn't explain our judgments, where utilitarians at first said, okay, it turned out that deontology is incoherent, that our intuitions are contradictory. And then different deontologists wrote about this. For example, about the loop trolley case. Or we did experimental philosophy. And in fact, we found out that the judgments of people were exactly as deontology predicted. Yet utilitarians had claimed for years and years that they've proven that deontologists are incoherent because of the loop trolley problem.
wait, sorry, what is the
So I
loop
think
trolley problem?
so in the in the trolley problem case, a traditional reply of the deontologist was to say you ought not push the fat man because you use him as a means to an end, whereas it's fine to divert the trolley because you don't use as a means to an end. And then I think it was Judith Jarvis Thompson, I think, who came up with the loop trolley problem, where you divert the trolley, but you only do that because you know that the trolley will go in a circle and then it will eventually reach, will kill a person and will thereby stop. And only in such a way will it prevent the 5 people from being killed. So you are at first just
Oh, I see. So it's like, so the train loops around and would hit those 5 people unless it bumps into some other guy first.
exactly
Okay.
exactly.
Um,
And basically, what what experimental philosophy found, that it really matters how you think about this case. If you think about it like, okay, I'm gonna use this person to stop the train, then people had the judgment, generally speaking, that this is maybe not permissible. Whereas if you framed it in a different way, then people said, okay, maybe this is okay. Although people were not, many more people agreed with the normal lever case than with the loop trolley problem, which I think is also what we would expect given deontology.
Sure, but I mean, I'm perfectly willing to grant that many people's initial intuitions are deontological. I just think that the deontological intuitions are the type of intuitions that can't withstand scrutiny. But I mean, if you want to look at the record of experimental philosophy, as you call it, I think that it's primarily served as evidence for utilitarianism. So if you look at the research of people like Joshua Green, are you familiar with the dual process theory of morality?
I am.
Yeah, and I think that the evidence for the dual process theory, if the dual process theory is true, that's quite strong evidence for utilitarianism. And I think that the evidence for the dual process theory is quite strong. So if you look at the most recent, most comprehensive research by Patil and I don't remember the other authors, the 2021 paper that assembled the largest data set, it found significant, it assembled thousands of people and found significant evidence for the dual process theory. And so like, I think that overall that'll tend to favor utilitarianism. But
yeah, so I'm gotta say I'm not that well read on the literature, but I think the idea is that the ontology is mainly based on intuitive, unconscious judgment, and if you think, the more you think about it, the more you will be a utilitarian, right?
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I think there are some studies which somewhat contradict this, although those can be questioned, of course. So, but on the other hand, I think we can just say that as a deontologist, we should say that people who think about a case like for half an hour and then they change their opinion from utilitarianism to deontology, they are just misguided due to their, I don't know, due to their, if they are philosophers, due to their theoretical commitments, if they are ordinary people, maybe because they heard of a thought experiment which confused them. I think we have lots of possibilities to explain that away, and I think in many cases, even in most cases, I would say it seems to be that our intuitive starting points seem to be roughly correct. I think you're kind of diminishing how correct our intuitions are. Sure, you can find cases in, I don't know, in mathematics or in, I don't know, in economics, lots of cases where people, or in decision theory, where people get it intuitively wrong. But I think if you think about the main intuitions we have, they generally seem to be very reliable to me, especially if they are very strong.
Well, I don't think that them being strong is a very good indicator. So there was an interesting study that I read that found that like people who claim to be 99% confident in a view are only right like 80% of the time. People who claim they're like 90% confident were like more right than people who claim to be 99% confident. But I mean, I just think that I just think that the fact that like every single example ends up turning against the deontologist is pretty good evidence.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that the torture versus death specs case, because that's another case that I have strong views on. And you mentioned it a little bit earlier.
I think it would turn out kind of similar, like the repugnant conclusion thing, or the what else did we talk about? Yeah, so I think it would just come down to either there is no point where it would ever be justified, or there is a point, but I can't tell you which one it is. But I just wouldn't grant you this kind of iteration thing, which you would. I'm familiar with your content, so.
Okay. So what are some of the other reasons you reject utilitarianism where you think it gets a wrong result? Ideally obscure ones, so that I'm not prepared, so that I don't have to so that you don't feel like there's sort of a preparation disadvantage, and that I've like a bunch of arguments on them.
I didn't prepare any not well-known ones, because I just think that the well-known ones are pretty good objections. And if you just say you have no intuition whatsoever that, I don't know, that justice, that people get what they deserve, is at least to a very, very, very small degree valuable. I don't really know what else to say. I think that's, you talked about bullet biting. To me, that's such a huge bullet that, yeah. So I think that's a very strong objection. I think.
Let's talk about that case some more. So okay. So I mean, I think that in the case of retributivist intuition, so one, I think there is a plausible debunking count. There was a paper by Kreidfeld, I think it was called. It was done in 2020. I can try to find the link if people are interested. That argued for an evolutionary debunking of retributivism. So we have an evolutionary reason to be angry at bad people and to want them to suffer. And so that's certainly not enough to completely undermine retributivism, or to make it so that we should totally discount retributivism. But it does undermine it to some degree, no doubt.
Yeah, so I think this strategy could be promising in the positive case. So, for example, if someone who has been raped feels that the murderer should die, independently of the consequences, obviously we can explain this not by moral truth, but by evolution, obvious psychology, etc. But I think the intuition that it's really, 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 really bad if people are unjustly punished, even if that leads to very good consequences. I think that's really hard to explain away. I think if you try to explain away that intuition, you can explain like almost everything. I think if I give up that intuition, I shouldn't become a utilitarian. I think I should become an external skeptic. I should become an error theorist, because I can't believe anything at all.
Okay, so what determines whether a person deserves to suffer? Or how do we go about determining deserved? So if a person thinks that they're acting morally, then do they?
So yeah, that's a good question. So I think you are doing good whenever you act correctly because you think it's the right thing. And on the other hand, you can act badly even if you think it's the right thing, because like Hitler doesn't get off the hook even if he found out that he believed that he was a hero. But I think believing that you do the right thing, like having a desire to do the right thing, makes your action less bad, but it can still be bad even then.
Okay, so sorry, just can you explain what the net? So if you do something that's immoral that you think is moral, then you should still sometimes deserve to suffer, correct?
When you do
Or
something
you're
which is immoral
so
and
like
which you also
what you think that it's moral, but you're wrong. It's actually immoral. So like uh
ah
uh so like let's say that Hitler thought that he was acting morally.
yeah, so you do something immoral but you think it was moral.
Correct.
Yeah, because I think you said it the other way around. Sorry.
Oh yeah. So yeah, it's immoral, but you think that it's moral.
Yeah, so yeah, definitely you could still be punished. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say that there's a politician who is an earnest Democrat, but let's stipulate that the Democrats are like horrible. And so the politician enacts policies that are really bad, but they're just a really nice person. Do they deserve to suffer?
Sorry, I just please repeat it. Sorry.
Yeah, so let's say that there's a politician who is a very nice person, but
Mhm.
supports and implements policies that end up being really immoral. So, for example, I don't know what your stance on abortion is, but let's say that someone adopts the stance on abortion that's the opposite of yours, and they think that that's the right thing to do. Do
Yeah,
they deserve to suffer?
I would say depends on the specifics of the case.
What
Like,
specifics would it depend on?
for example, if the person believed that it would be, I don't know, it would be okay to abort uh, female fetuses because females are inherently worthless, then obviously if they think it's moral,
Okay, what if a
then
person has just this bizarre view that like females are philosophical zombies, so they think that they're not sentient, and so
um, I,
they just have
I,
this like mistaken empirical fact, which, if true, would mean that women didn't actually
yeah,
matter.
I think you are um, blameworthy for something insofar as you are blameworthy for the fact that you have a mistaken moral belief. So if we had a perfect computer and we knew that it was completely reasonable for that person because maybe they were raised in a anti-female cult or something, it was completely reasonable for them to believe that, then I think they shouldn't be punished. But
Okay,
obviously,
so
that's not
okay,
reasonable in the
so
world.
you think that if a person is raised in a cult that says that women are not sentient, and then goes on to like torture and rape a woman, then they don't deserve to suffer in that case.
It depends on the specifics of the case.
They think that they're acting morally in that case because they think
Yes,
that women.
but the question is whether they could have, in the relevant sense, come to a different belief. Obviously, I think in a very narrow sense, they couldn't have because determinism is probably true. But um, they, they could have, they were in circumstances and had the intellectual capacities, etc., to come to a different belief. Usually, the indoctrination that you undergo is not so bad that you literally couldn't have thought otherwise.
Okay,
Maybe in
what
the
if
narrow sense, but not in the broad sense.
so what if 90% of people who are in roughly comparable situations hold the beliefs that they do.
90% of people who were in their circumstances also came to that belief.
Yeah.
That's what you mean?
Yes.
Again, it depends on the specifics of the case. I don't think it's a popularity contest. Maybe 90% of people are deeply immoral.
Okay,
Maybe
but
not.
what if 90% of people come to the genuine view that that's the case? Like let's say that the reason they come to that belief on religious basis, their religion teaches that, and they're convinced by the historical evidence for their religion. They think that there's more historical evidence for their religion than there is for Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Um, uh,
Okay, but I'm just gonna say it depends on the specifics. Like,
what other specifics does it depend on?
just because you are raised in a religion doesn't mean you have to believe that religion. I was raised as a basically fundamental Christian, and I'm an agnostic. Why? Why does that mean?
No. So so other than what percentage of people believe it, and how like reasonably justified they are in believing, what other things does it depend on?
Oh, yeah, it depends on their motive and in how justified they were in forming that motive. I don't think
So they have a moral
those are the
motive.
two main factors, I would say.
So they have a moral motive in this case. Like they think that it's moral to do.
Sure. In that case, it would depend on whether that motive is justified.
Okay.
If it were justified, then
Okay.
from their point of view, then they ought not be punished.
So, is there any amount of depravity that a person can have which makes it so that punishing them is so morally important that it would be worth killing a person?
Wait, I'm sorry. English is not my first language. What does depravity mean?
Oh, like immorality, viciousness, horrendousness,
Oh,
badness of character.
which is so bad that they deserve to be killed.
Right.
No,
No. Well, no. Okay. Well, your answer to that gave me the answer.
Please.
But
what
no, I mean, the question was that could they be so bad that someone else deserves to be killed to make it so that they and so if you think they don't deserve to be killed, then presumably you think that they wouldn't.
Yeah, I think you mentioned such a case at the beginning of the talk, and my first intuition is that there wouldn't be such a case. Like I said, I would say that there's a very, very, very weak reason to punish someone, and I think it's very plausible that there's a certain kind of threshold which can never be crossed, like where even if you now come up with a case with like 1 quadrillion people, then I think I still would say it could never be justified, because ultimately it just is always more important that people aren't killed than that justice is done in that retributive sense.
Okay,
In that
and this
positive sense.
And this requires rejecting transitivity, right? Like if you accepted transitivity,
which I already did.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So okay. So
I think we should. Yeah.
Sorry. Good.
I just wanted to say we should go maybe into one further topic, and then we should call it a day, maybe.
Okay.
Because I think we've been talking for 2 hours.
Yeah. So So let's say that you knew that you were becoming more moral over time, okay? Such that you were about to attend a Parfit lecture and you knew that, by the end of the Parfit lecture, you would just be way, way more moral. And you're deciding whether to eat a cookie now or later. Should you, merely in virtue of the fact that you'll be a more moral person later, decide to eat the cookie later?
That's a funny case. Probably, probably not. Um,
But
um,
do you think that?
uh,
But do you think that what a person
Wait,
deserves changes depending on how much virtue they have at particular
yeah,
moments? And so, if you were to become more
true.
virtuous, then your enjoyment would
But
matter more,
I,
right?
I mean, if you are the same person that then you have now just as much right to eat it than later on.
But you'll be more moral later. And you said that the importance of benefit that your what you deserve changes over time, such that later, when you're a more moral person, it becomes comparatively more important to benefit you, right?
I mean, saying that I would have to eat the cookie later on because it would bring about a more just state of affairs assumes that every agent should maximize goodness in the world always, but I don't think that's true. I think you have the right to. I don't think you have a reason either way to eat it later or sooner. I think it's your cookie to eat. You have the right to do it, and
But
maybe it would be super erogatory to eat it later, but I don't think it's a strong reason either way.
okay, but let's say that I became evil intermittently. Um, uh, so I just became turned into basically a serial killer for no, I mean, or let's change the case. So Humor gave his case of you can either give a cookie to Mother Teresa or to Ted Bundy, but Ted Bundy likes the cookie slightly more. So let's imagine that for 5 minutes a day, Ted Bundy took on saintly dispositions, such that he basically became as moral as Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa became as immoral as Ted Bundy. For like 5 minutes a day, she just gained this bizarre desire to go on like murdering people. During those 5 minutes, who should you give the cookie to?
Um, I mean, I think personality just kind of adds up over time. So just because it's not like you look at the current time slice, you look at least partly how much moral worth you have added up over your life. So in that case, I would say it should be given to this person, which, yeah, I think my intuition is to give it to the person who has lived more time of significantly more time of their life as moral. That's my
Okay,
intuition.
wait. So just to be clear, even though at this point Ted Bundy is currently thinking, "How can I help the poor of the world?" Mother Teresa is thinking, Are there any children nearby who I can stab to death?" You still think that Mother Teresa deserves the cookie more?
Um, I think it. Hmm, again, I think it depends on the specifics of the case, because I would say that um, personhood depends on psychological continuity. So if they have completely new desires, then I would say it's a completely different person. And in that case, we couldn't add up the moral worth. In that case, at the moment where Mother Teresa changes into Bundy, then
Okay, So let's imagine that Mother Teresa holds this weird view that if atheism is true, then we should go about killing people.
If
And
atheism is true, then what? Sorry.
then we should go about killing people. She's one of those
Okay.
she's one of those crazy Christians. And so and for like 10 minutes a day, she'll read like I don't know J.H. Sobel, and she'll become convinced like for like 5 minutes that atheism is true. And so for those 5 minutes, she thinks she could kill people. And Ted Bundy, over the course of those 5 minutes, Ted Bundy reads Parfit, and while he's reading Parfit, he becomes saintly. But then when he stops reading Parfit, like he like basically lacks object permanence for the words uttered by Parfit. So then he turns back into being a vicious serial killer. Um, so in that case, which one should you give the cookie to?
Wait. They just changed their some of their desires and some of their beliefs for 5 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, in that case, I would go with what I said previously. In that case, it probably would be the same person, and in that case, my intuition tells me that probably Mother Teresa, even though in that exact moment she has evil desires, would probably deserve it more because she has aggregated so much moral worth previously, and she's still the same person. Although we might have
So Mother Teresa deserves the cookie despite her current thoughts, despite her first thought after seeing the cookie being, "Is there any way I can use this cookie to like kill any kids?" But despite
wait,
that,
wait,
but
wait,
despite
wait,
that,
wait. Is there a reasonable chance she can do
no,
that?
no, 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 no. There's zero
Yeah,
percent chance. She goes on this like island, like this deserted island to like read
yeah.
J.H. Sobel.
I mean, let's assume we have a perfect judge, and he has like one cookie left, and he decides who deserves it more. Um, uh, yeah, I think in that case, my intuition is. I mean, I guess it would also depend on. Yeah, no, I think my intuition is that it would still be Mother Teresa. I think.
Okay.
Be-
Um.
sorry, I don't think that's unintuitive. I mean, it's
That
weird, but
seems
I,
really
I think
unintuitive to me.
I think we
But
generally think about justice like that. I think if we found out that there was a person who, for his whole life, was a perfect friend, he cared for his family, and then um, for 5 minutes during very weird circumstances, maybe because they had a very bad day or because they were, I don't know, because they read an article in a newspaper which completely changed their mind. I think we wouldn't have the intuition, okay, this person now believes horrible things, so this is a completely horrible person. In fact, I think when we read about murderers in the newspaper, I think people often feel very sympathetic with them if they find out how what their backstory was, and they think that should factor in how we assess them.
yeah.
So I don't think it's
So
unintuitive.
this will be the last sort of question, and then we can wrap up. So let's imagine that a person. So rather than to get rid of potential status quo bias, let's imagine that people lived very long lives. So people live like 1 million years, okay? And so a person spends 1 million years as Mother Teresa, and then they have their, going into their millionth and first year, they read Nietzsche and become this like just horrendous nihilist, and they want to go around killing people. No, I mean they're not. they're like far away from any people, so they won't harm anyone. But so for like 5,000 years, just continuously, they're like just evil. They're the perfectly consistent Caligula, to use the example of Sharon Street, where they just want to cause as much misery as they can. Um, in that case, should they should they be given the like would they deserve more than the person who's the inverse, where the first person is evil for like 10 million years and then they become like perfectly moral for 10,000 years until their untimely death?
Let me think about that. So we have a person who was like good for like, you said 10 billion years, something like that, a huge number. And then we have someone who sorry, please repeat it once again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so you have a person who so they're moral for perfectly moral for 10 million years and then they turn evil and they become horrendously evil for 10,000 years. You have another person who's horrendously immoral for 10 million years and then they turn
Oh,
moral for 10,000 years. Who deserves 7,000 years into their either good or bad or to the last 10,000 years of their life? Who deserves the cookie?
yeah. So I don't, if I understood it correctly, I don't think people ought to be punished or rewarded based on what they are going to do.
No, not based on what they're going to do, based on what they already did. So this is in
Okay, so
the last little bit of their life when they either when after the trajectory in terms of whether they're good or
okay, so
evil has
basically the
moved.
first person lived a perfect life for the first half of their life, and the other person for the second half,
No.
basically.
It's not half. It's 99.9%.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
But yeah,
I think my intuition would be towards the person who changed towards good, but I think that's only because I think such a kind of life is inherently better, is more valuable. I think if I were not an objective list theorist, for example, I wouldn't care either way. In the way you described the case, if
okay,
it's the exact same number of good years, I don't see a huge reason to care
okay,
either way.
all right.
Yeah, yeah.
So this may be a good place to wrap up. This has been a good chat. We fleshed out many of the sort of differences. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thanks for the discussion. Bye.
See you later.